Chapter 1. Young Davy. Davy Crockett was born on August 17th, 1787, in Greene County, Tennessee. In 1787, America was a new nation. Most of the territory was a wilderness. Davy Crockett was born in the wilderness. His father, John Crockett, was an Irish immigrant. He fought in the American Revolution. He was a very courageous man. Davy had a difficult childhood. His family was poor. When he was 12 years old, his father said,
"Davy, our family doesn't have any money. You must go to work as a cattle herder."
"All right, Father,"
said Davy.
"I'm happy to help the family."
Davy traveled 400 miles on foot. He took cattle from Tennessee to other places. When he finished his work, he was far from home. He was lost. Davy walked 400 miles. When he returned home, he was very tired. Davy gave his father the money he made. His father was happy and said,
"Thank you, Davy. Now we have some money for the winter months."
"I can do it again to help the family,"
Davy answered. The years passed. Davy went to school when he had time. He spent most of his time hunting in the forest. He was the best shooter and hunter in Tennessee. He entered many shooting competitions and won them all. He called his rifle Old Betsy. For years, Davy hunted bears and other wild animals. He was a trapper. Once he hunted 100 bears in 6 months. It was dangerous to hunt bears, but Davy was very courageous and strong. He knew the forest well. The Indians were his good friends. He ran fast and was a strong fighter. He fought with the wildcats of the mountains. Some people said that one day Davy saw a raccoon in a tree. He wanted to shoot it, but the raccoon saw him and said,
"Wait a minute. Are you Davy Crockett?"
Davy answered.
"Yes, I am."
The raccoon answered.
"Then don't shoot. I'll come down from the tree."
And the raccoon came down from the tree. Chapter 2. The Creek Wars. Everyone liked Davy Crockett. He was always happy, with a big smile. He was honest and always helped others. Davy was a tall man. He wore a coonskin cap, buckskin trousers, and a buckskin jacket. He always carried his long rifle, Old Betsy. In 1806, Davy married Polly Finley. She was a school teacher. They had 2 sons and a daughter, John, Joseph, and Judith. After a few years, the Crockett family moved into the Tennessee Hills. The Tennessee Hills were near hostile Indian country. In 1812, the war between the United States and Britain began. The Mohawk and Creek Indians fought with the British against the Americans. The American General Andrew Jackson organized a small army. He wanted to fight the Creek Indians and the British. Davy fought with this army. He was a scout because he knew the territory well. His work as a scout was very important. Davy traveled across Tennessee, the Mississippi Territory, Florida, and Louisiana with General Jackson's army. The Battle of New Orleans was a big victory for General Jackson and the Americans. The war ended in 1814. The British lost the war. The Indians lost their territories and went away. New American families settled in the Tennessee hills. At the end of the war, Davy returned home to his family. Unfortunately, his wife, Polly, died. Life was again difficult for Davy. He worked as a trapper and took care of his 3 children. After some time, Davy met Meg Mackinac. Meg's father was an American trapper. Her mother was a Cherokee Indian. Davy fell in love and married her. They had twins. Davy named the twins George and Washington in honor of America's first president. There were now 5 children in the Crockett family. Chapter 3. Davy enters politics. Davy and his big family wanted to live in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee. Davy bought a covered wagon. He and his family put all of their things inside the wagon. Chairs, tables, beds, clothing, and many other things. 4 strong horses pulled the big wagon. Davy and his wife sat in the front. The 5 children were inside the wagon. After traveling in the forests and mountains, they arrived in Lawrenceburg. This was their new home. Davy opened a mill. He was a hard worker. His neighbors liked him. Everybody in Lawrenceburg liked him. He became a representative of the town government. He was very popular. People liked listening to his stories about hunting bears and about the War of 1812. They admired his honesty and courage. Davy was different from other politicians. His speeches were never boring. His message was clear. He spoke to the people in simple language. He dressed like them, too. He always wore his coonskin cap and his buckskin trousers and jacket. One day, at an important meeting, he didn't know what to say. So he looked at the people and said,
Today, I am like a man trying to drink water from an empty barrel. I'll tell you a funny story, and then we can go home.
Davy soon became a representative of the government of Tennessee. Now he was in politics. He helped his people in many ways. At first, many politicians laughed at Davy because he never wore a suit. After some time, these politicians admired and respected him. Davy was an honest man. Everyone believed what he said. His buckskin jacket had 2 big pockets. In his right pocket, Davy had a bottle of whiskey. When he met his friends, he gave them some whiskey. In those days, it was common to give some whiskey to friends. Chapter 4. Congressman Crockett. Davy often went to Nashville, the capital of Tennessee. In Nashville, he worked for the Tennessee government. One day, while Davy was working for the Tennessee government, a big flood destroyed his mill. This was terrible. He was very unhappy because he'd lost a lot of money. When he returned to Lawrenceburg, he started a new type of work. This time, he made barrels. He sold these barrels in New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans was about 400 miles away. To go to New Orleans, he traveled on the Mississippi River. He had a big boat to carry the barrels. It was difficult to travel on the Mississippi River. There were many dangers. One day, his boat had a bad accident. It began to sink. Davy almost drowned. He lost his boat and his barrels, but he didn't lose his life. In 1827, there was a big election in Tennessee. Davy Crockett became a United States congressman. This was a great honor for him. In the United States Congress, he represented the people of Tennessee. He traveled to Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States. Davy was very happy to be a congressman. He wanted to help his people. There were congressmen who wanted to take land away from the Fox Indians of Tennessee. Davy protected these Indians. He fought against dishonest congressmen.
The Fox Indians cannot live without their land,
Davy shouted.
I must defend all the American people of Tennessee, the whites and the Indians.
After months of hard work, Davy was not able to help the Fox Indians. The U.S. Congress made a law that took away land from the Indians. Davy was very angry. He hated injustice. In 1835, he left the U.S. Congress. Chapter 5. Texas. In 1835, the Crockett family left Tennessee. They put all their things in a big covered wagon, and they traveled for many days. They finally arrived in Texas. At that time, Texas belonged to Mexico. At first, the Mexican government was happy with the American settlers. They cultivated the land. Many settlers went to Texas because land was very cheap. With a little money, a settler bought a lot of land. More and more Americans went to Texas. There were about 20,000 American settlers in eastern Texas. There were only 5,000 Mexicans. The Mexican government did not like this. There were too many Americans. Mexico decided to close its borders. The American settlers were very angry. In 1834, the Mexican general Santa Anna became the dictator of Mexico. He was a cruel man. He sent his soldiers to the Mexican border. He did not want the American settlers to enter Mexico. By 1834, there were more than 30,000 Americans living in Texas. They wanted Texas to be an independent American state. They did not want to live under a cruel Mexican dictator. Davy and his family now lived in Texas. They were happy in their new home. They wanted the independence of Texas, too. One day, Davy heard that the Mexicans wanted to attack Fort Alamo. The Alamo was a Spanish church and fort near San Antonio in western Texas. There were Texans and American soldiers at Fort Alamo. There were also women and children at the fort. War was in the air. Davy knew he must fight for the independence of Texas. Chapter 6. Fort Alamo. Davy asked other American settlers to go to the Alamo with him. Few men wanted to fight, but this did not stop Davy. He and 15 men decided to go to the Alamo. They were ready to fight the Mexicans. There were 112 men at the Alamo. Colonel William Travis of the U.S. Army was the commander. William Travis was a young colonel. He was only 27 years old. He was a lawyer. He entered the U.S. Army to fight for the independence of Texas. One day, Colonel Jim Bowie and 30 men arrived at the fort. Jim Bowie was a tall, strong man. He was a hunter and trapper.
Good evening, Colonel Travis,
said Colonel Bowie.
I have a message for you from General Sam Houston. Here is the letter.
Colonel Travis opened it. He read it aloud. You must destroy the Alamo and come with my army. General Santa Anna will attack the Alamo soon. General Sam Houston. What? Said Colonel Travis. I don't want to destroy the Alamo. I want to defend it. Colonel Bowie said,
"We cannot defend the Alamo. We must have more men."
In February 1836, Davy Crockett and his men arrived at the fort. Colonel Travis was happy to see them. He asked Davy and his men to defend the Alamo. "We don't have many men," said Colonel Travis. "We must ask for more soldiers. I am sending a messenger to General Fannin. He can send us more soldiers." Davy said,
My men and I want to defend the Alamo. We are hunters and trappers. Our long rifles can shoot at a great distance.
Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie became good friends. Together they repaired the walls of the fort. They cleaned the rifles and the cannons. They were ready for the battle. Chapter 7. The Red Flag. One morning a messenger arrived.
I have a message from General Fannin. He is very sorry. He cannot send any soldiers. You must leave the Alamo now. General Santa Anna is near. You are all in danger.
"We don't want to leave the Alamo,"
said Jim Bowie.
"We want to fight for the independence of Texas." "How many soldiers has General Santa Anna got?"
He's got about 4,000 soldiers,
said the messenger. Colonel Bowie looked at Colonel Travis. "We must speak to our men," said Colonel Travis.
"Yes,"
said Bowie.
"We must speak to them."
Colonel Travis called his 187 men. He said sadly, "General Santa Anna is coming to attack us. He has about 4,000 soldiers and lots of ammunition. We have only 187 men and little ammunition. We have little food and water. Remember, there are women and children in the fort." Then he marked a line on the ground with his sword. "Those who want to fight for the independence of Texas, cross this line. The others can leave the fort and go home." There was a very long silence. Davy thought about his wife and his 5 children. Then he thought about the independence of Texas and the American settlers. He thought about a new American state, Texas. All the men crossed the line. These men wanted to defend the Alamo. These men wanted an independent Texas. On February 23, 1836, General Santa Anna and his army arrived. He sent a messenger to the Alamo. He wanted the people in the Alamo to leave. The men in the Alamo answered with a cannon shot. They did not want to leave. They did not want to return to the United States. General Santa Anna was furious. He showed a red flag. Red flag meant no prisoners. He wanted to kill everyone in the fort. On February 24, 1836, General Santa Anna's army attacked the Alamo. The Mexicans had an enormous cannon. It shot a cannonball that damaged a wall of the fort. Davy said,
We must destroy that cannon. It can destroy the walls of our fort.
That night, Davy and Jim Bowie left the fort. They went to the Mexican camp. Everyone in the camp was sleeping. Davy and Jim silently passed behind the 2 Mexican guards. They put mud and stones in the enormous cannon. Then they returned to the Alamo. The next morning, the Mexican army used the cannon. It exploded. The Mexicans were very surprised. Their enormous cannon was destroyed. The men in the Alamo killed many Mexican soldiers. The Mexican army attacked many times during the day, but the Texans and the American army defended the Alamo.
Part 1. "My dear fellow,"
said Sherlock Holmes as we sat by the fire in his house at Baker Street,
"real life is infinitely stranger than anything we could invent. We would not dare invent things which are commonplace things of life. If we could go out of that window, fly over this great city, gently remove the roofs of houses, and look at the peculiar things that are happening, the strange coincidences, the plans, and the wonderful chains of events, we would discover things much more interesting than in books."
"But I do not believe it," I answered. "The stories in the newspapers are never very interesting. In fact, they are always very boring."
"That is because,"
said Holmes,
"newspapers always repeat the official reports of magistrates and police reports. You can be certain that there is nothing as unnatural and strange as the commonplace."
"I know," I replied, "that your cases are always very interesting. But let us look at today's newspaper." I picked up the newspaper and began to read an article. It was about a husband who was cruel to his wife. "I don't have to read the article," I said, "but I am sure that the man had a girlfriend, that he drank, and that he began to hit his wife. I am also sure that there was a sympathetic sister, or landlady."
"You have chosen a bad example, Watson,"
said Holmes,
"because I have worked on this case. The man, Mr. Dundas, did not have a girlfriend, and he did not drink, and he did not hit her. Instead, at the end of every meal, he took out his false teeth and threw them at his wife. You must admit that nobody could invent such a story."
"Do you have any interesting cases now?" I asked.
"Well, I am working on 10 or 12 cases, but none of them are interesting. They are important, you understand, without being interesting. I have found that unimportant matters are usually more interesting. If there is a big crime, the motive is generally obvious, so they are generally not very interesting. But I think I will have an interesting case in a few minutes."
Holmes was standing at the window and looking down at the dull grey London streets. There was a woman standing in the street. She was moving her hands nervously. It was obvious that she could not make up her mind. Then suddenly she ran across the road and rang Holmes's doorbell.
"I know those symptoms,"
said Holmes.
"When a woman hesitates like that on the pavement, it means that she has a love problem. She wants help, but she thinks that her problem is too delicate to communicate. But when a woman does not hesitate and rings the doorbell hard, it means she was seriously wronged. In this case, this woman is confused and perplexed, and wants an explanation."
As Holmes was speaking, the servant announced Miss Mary Sutherland. She was a large woman. She wore a hat with a red feather, a black jacket, a dark brown dress, and grey gloves. She also wore small, round gold earrings. When Holmes saw her, he said,
"Isn't it difficult for you to type with such bad eyesight?"
"I thought so at first,"
Miss Sutherland replied.
"but now I can type without looking at the keys."
Then she looked surprised and frightened when she understood that Holmes already knew so much about her.
"How do you know that?"
asked Miss Sutherland.
"It is my business to know things,"
said Holmes, laughing.
"If I could not see these things, why would people come to me? In any case, I can see the marks of the glasses on your nose."
"I have come here,"
she said,
"because I want to know where Mr. Hosmer Angel has gone."
"Why did you come here in such a hurry?"
asked Holmes. Once again, Miss Sutherland looked very surprised. Holmes then explained that her boots were not the same, and that they were not completely buttoned.
"Yes, I did hurry out of the house because I was angry at Mr. Windybank, that is, my father. He did not want to ask the police about Mr. Angel. He said that nothing bad had happened. This made me angry, so I came here to see you.
Your father?
Said Holmes.
He must be your stepfather, because his surname is different from yours.
Yes, my stepfather. I call him father, even though that seems strange to me. You see, he is only 5 years older than me.
And is your mother alive?
Asked Holmes.
Oh, yes, mother is alive and well.
Answered Miss Sutherland.
But I was not happy when she married Mr. Windybank so soon after father died. Also, Mr. Windybank is 15 years younger than mother. Father was a plumber and had a good business, and when he died, mother continued the business. But when she married Mr. Windybank, he made her sell it.
Do you live on the money from the business?
Asked Holmes.
Oh, no,
replied Miss Sutherland.
I inherited some money from my uncle. I cannot touch it, but with the interest I receive £100 a year.
That should be enough for you to live quite comfortably,
said Holmes.
I give that money to mother, and I live on the money I make typing,
she replied.
Now, can you tell us about Mr. Hosmer Angel?
Asked Holmes. Miss Sutherland blushed deeply and said,
I met him at the plumber's ball. They used to send tickets to my father when he was alive, and after he died they sent them to my mother. But Mr. Windybank didn't want us to go. He said that my father's friends were not good enough for us. But the day of the ball, Mr. Windybank went to France on business, so mother and I went to the ball, and it was there I met Mr. Angel.
I suppose,
said Holmes,
that Mr. Windybank was very angry with you when he discovered that you had gone to the ball.
No, not very,
replied Miss Sutherland.
He said that it was impossible to stop a woman when she really wanted something.
And did you see Mr. Hosmer after the ball?
Asked Holmes.
Yes, but he couldn't come to the house when father was there. Father didn't want anybody to come to the house. So Mr. Hosmer said,
We should wait until your father goes to France before we see each other. In the meantime, we can write to each other every day.
Were you engaged to the gentleman at this time?
Asked Holmes.
Oh, yes, Mr. Holmes. We were engaged after the first walk that we took. Mr. Angel worked in an office in Leadenhall Street.
Which office?
That's the worst part. I don't know.
Then where did you send your letters?
To the Leadenhall Street post office, where he got them. He said to me,
The other workers in my office will make fun of me if they see my letters.
I told him that I could type my letters like he did his, but he said,
A typed letter comes from an impersonal machine and not from you.
This shows how fond he was of me, Mr. Holmes, and the nice little things he thought of.
It was most suggestive,
said Holmes.
I have always said that the little things are infinitely the most important. Can you remember any other little things about Mr. Hosmer Angel?
He was a very shy man, Mr. Holmes. He always wanted to walk with me in the evening instead of during the day. He was very gentlemanly. Even his voice was gentle. He told me that he had had a bad infection of the tonsils when he was a child, so he had to whisper. He always wore elegant clothes. His eyes were weak, just like mine, and he wore dark glasses against the sun.
Well, what happened when Mr. Windybank returned to France?
Asked Holmes.
Mr. Angel came to my house and said that we should get married before father returned. He was very serious and said,
Put your hand on the Bible and promise me that you will always love me.
Mother agreed with him. Mother liked him from the beginning, and liked him even more than I did. When they started talking about our getting married within the week, I asked them if I should ask Father first. They said no. I, however, did not want to do anything in secret, so I wrote to Father at his office in France. But the letter came back to me on the very day of the wedding.
It missed him, then?
Yes, sir. He had started back to England just before the letter arrived in France.
Ha! That was unfortunate. Your wedding was planned, then, for the Friday of that week. Was it to be in church?
Yes, sir, but very quietly. On the day of the wedding, Hosmer came in a hansom to take Mother and me to the church. But since there were two of us, Mother and I went in the hansom, and Hosmer took a cab. We got to the church first, and when the cab arrived, we waited for him to come out. But he never did. The cabman said that he could not understand what had happened to him.
I think that you have been very badly treated,
said Holmes.
Oh, no, sir. Hosmer was too good and kind to leave so. Why, all morning before the wedding he said to me,
If anything happens to me, you must always love me. You must wait for me. I will return to you.
I thought this very strange to say on the day of our wedding, but his disappearance explains everything.
It certainly does,
said Holmes.
In your opinion, did he know that he was in danger?
Yes, I think so.
But do you know what the danger was?
No, I don't.
One more question. How did your mother react?
She was angry and told me that I should never speak about him again.
And your father? Did you tell him?
Yes. He said,
Something terrible has happened to Hosmer, but he will return.
I agree with my father. Why would Hosmer leave me? After all, there was no money involved. Hosmer did not borrow money from me, and I never put the money which I had inherited in his name, so he did not take my money and leave.
Then she pulled out a handkerchief and began to cry.
I will try to solve your problem,
said Holmes.
But don't think about it any more. Forget about Mr. Angel.
Do you think that I will ever see him again?
No, I'm afraid not.
Then what has happened to him?
You will leave the question with me. Now, I need some of Mr. Angel's letters, a good description of him, and also your father's address.
I never had Mr. Angel's address,
said Miss Sutherland.
But here is Mr. Windybank's address. He works for a wine importer. Here is the advertisement with a description of Hosmer that I put in the newspaper, the Chronicle.
Miss Sutherland then left, but before leaving she said,
I will always wait for Hosmer Angel to return.
Part 2.
When she had left, I asked Holmes about the case.
The young woman is quite interesting, but her little problem is not very difficult or unusual. Would you mind reading me the description of Hosmer Angel?
I then read it to Holmes. Missing, a gentleman called Hosmer Angel. About 5'7" tall. He's strongly built with black hair, black sideboards, and moustache. He's a little bald in the centre. He wears dark glasses, and he's got a speech defect. He has got a sallow complexion. He was wearing a black coat, black waistcoat, grey trousers, and brown boots. Please contact Miss Sutherland, etc., etc.
That is enough,
said Holmes.
Now, look at these letters, which Hosmer wrote to her. What do you see?
They are typed, I said.
Not only that, but the signature is typed too. The point about the signature is very suggestive. In fact, we can call it conclusive.
Of what?
My dear fellow, can't you see how important this fact is to the case?
No, I can't, I replied. Unless Hosmer didn't sign his letters because he didn't want to be legally responsible for what he promised.
No, that was not the point,
said Holmes.
But now I will write 2 letters which will solve this mystery. One of the letters is to Mr. Windybank's firm in the city, and the other one will be to Mr. Windybank himself, to ask him to come here to meet us tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock.
A few minutes before 6 the next day, I returned to Baker Street. When I walked in, Holmes was doing chemistry experiments. "Well, have you solved it?" I said as I walked into the room.
Yes, it was the bisulfate of baryta.
"No! Miss Sutherland's mystery!" I cried.
Oh, that. I thought you were asking me about the chemistry experiment. There was never any mystery in the matter. The only problem is that the scoundrel did not do anything illegal, so he can't be punished.
Who was Hosmer Angel, and why did he abandon Miss Sutherland? But Holmes did not have time to answer me, because just then we heard someone knock at the door, and then someone walking towards Holmes's room.
This is the girl's stepfather. He wrote to me to say that he was coming,
said Holmes. The man who entered the room was a strongly built fellow without sideboards or moustache, with a sallow complexion, and he looked at us with a pair of penetrating grey eyes. He was wearing a black top hat.
Good evening, Mr. James Windybank,
said Holmes.
I believe this is the typed letter that you wrote to me to say that you were coming here.
Yes, sir. I am sorry that Miss Sutherland has troubled you about this little problem. Also, I don't like other people knowing about our family misfortune. Anyway, I don't think that you will ever find this Hosmer Angel.
On the contrary,
said Holmes quietly,
I am almost certain that I will find him.
Mr. Windybank started violently and dropped his gloves.
I am happy to hear that,
he said.
It is a curious thing,
remarked Holmes,
that a typewriter is just as distinctive as a man's handwriting. For example, in this letter of yours, I can see that this part of the R has a slight defect. There are also 14 other characteristics of your typewriter.
We write all the letters in the office with this typewriter,
said Mr. Windybank.
And now,
continued Holmes,
I will show you what is really very interesting. In fact, I am thinking about writing a book on the typewriter and its relation to crime.
Mr. Windybank jumped out of his chair and picked up his hat.
I cannot waste time over this ridiculous talk. If you can catch the man, catch him, and let me know when you have caught him.
Certainly,
said Holmes, walking over to the door and locking it.
I let you know that I have caught him.
What? Where?
Shouted Mr. Windybank, becoming white and looking around like a rat in a trap.
You can't get away, Mr. Windybank,
said Holmes.
This case was really very easy. Now, sit down and we can talk about it.
Mr. Windybank fell back into the chair.
I did not do anything illegal,
he stammered.
I am afraid that you are right. But, Mr. Windybank, it was a cruel, selfish, and heartless trick. Now, let us look at what happened,
said Holmes. Then Holmes sat down and began to talk.
The man marries a woman older than himself for her money. He can also use the money of the daughter as long as the daughter lives with him and the mother. The daughter has a lot of money, so it is important not to lose it. But the daughter is friendly and affectionate, so it is clear that she will soon find a husband. At first, this man tells the daughter that she cannot go out, but this will not solve the problem forever. Then one day the daughter says that she wants to go to a ball. What does the clever stepfather do then? With the help of the wife, he disguises himself. He wears dark glasses and puts on a fake moustache. Then he changes his voice and speaks very softly. He is even more certain that his plan will work because the girl is short-sighted. Then at the ball, this man keeps away other lovers by becoming the girl's lover himself.
It was just a joke at first,
groaned Mr. Windybank.
We didn't think that the girl would fall in love.
Yes, that is probably true,
continued Holmes.
But the girl really fell in love, and you decided to take the situation to the extreme. You began to see her often, and the mother said that she liked him very much. Then you decided to ask Miss Sutherland to marry you, so that she would never again think about other men. But it was difficult for you to pretend to go to France every time Miss Sutherland had to see Mr. Angel. You had to end the situation dramatically. In some way, you had to keep Miss Sutherland from thinking about other men in the future. Therefore, you made her promise on the Bible, and you told her that something could happen on the very morning of the wedding. You took her to the church, but obviously you could not marry her. You disappeared by using the old trick of entering one door of a cab and walking out the other. I think this is the chain of events, Mr. Windybank.
Yes, maybe that is true,
replied Mr. Windybank.
But I did not do anything illegal, and now you are breaking the law because you will not let me leave this room.
You are right. You did not do anything illegal,
said Holmes, as he unlocked and opened the door.
But you really deserve to be punished, and I would like to do it.
Then Holmes picked up a riding crop, but Mr. Windybank ran out of the door and out of the house.
Now he certainly is a cold-blooded scoundrel,
said Holmes, laughing.
That fellow will continue doing worse and worse crimes until he does something really bad and finishes on the gallows. In any case, this case had some interesting points.
I cannot completely follow your reasoning in this case, I said.
Well, it was clear from the first that Mr. Hosmer Angel had a very good reason for his actions, and that the only man who could really profit from the situation was the stepfather. He wanted to keep the £100 a year. Then it was very suggestive that Mr. Windybank and Mr. Hosmer Angel were never together. And so were the dark glasses, the soft voice, and the moustache. They all suggested a disguise. The final point was the typed signature. This made me think that the handwriting of the man must be very familiar to Miss Sutherland, and that if she saw even a small portion of it, she would recognize it.
And how did you verify these ideas? I asked.
First, I wrote to Mr. Windybank's firm. In the letter I described Mr. Angel after I had eliminated everything that could be a disguise, like the glasses, the moustache, and the voice, and I asked them if they had an employee like that. They wrote back to me and said that I had described Mr. James Windybank. Then I wrote to Mr. Windybank to invite him here, and as I expected, he typed his reply to me. Then I compared his letter with the letters of Mr. Angel. Voilà tout.
And Miss Sutherland? I asked.
If I tell her, she will not believe me,
replied Holmes.
Maybe you remember this Persian saying, "It is dangerous to take a tiger cub from its mother, and it is dangerous to take a delusion from a woman."